My name is Emma Hayes. If you had told me 10 years ago that one day my face would appear on the cover of business magazines, I would have laughed. Not because I lacked ambition, but because there was a time when I couldn't even afford a hot meal. I wasn't born into a wealthy family. I wasn't the favorite child. I wasn't the daughter my parents were proud of. I was simply the child they tolerated. I grew up in a small town outside Chicago. From the outside, we looked like a normal middle-class family. Inside our house, things were very different. My older brother, Tyler, could do no wrong. If he forgot to do his homework, my parents blamed the teacher. If he failed a test, they said school wasn't designed for smart people like him. But if I scored straight A's, they asked why I wasn't number one in the entire school. Nothing I did was ever enough. By the time I turned 14, I realized something most kids never have to think about. If I wanted anything, I had to earn it myself. So I got my first job bagging groceries at a neighborhood supermarket. Every afternoon after school, while my classmates were hanging out with friends, I was pushing shopping carts through freezing parking lots. My hands were cracked from the cold. My feet hurt every night. But I kept working. Not because I loved the job, because I believed it was my way out. Every paycheck meant freedom. Or at least, that's what I thought. Whenever I got paid, my parents found a reason to take some of my money. We're behind on bills. We need groceries. Families help each other. I believed them. Until I noticed something. My brother never had to help. His new sneakers always appeared. His phone was always upgraded. His football camps were always paid for. Meanwhile, I wore the same winter coat for 4 years. I told myself things would get better once I turned 18. I secretly opened a small savings account. Every tip, every overtime shift, every birthday dollar, I saved it. After 4 long years, I finally had a little over $900. To most people, that wasn't much. To me, it was hope. It was my ticket to college. It was proof that I could build a future without depending on anyone. Then one evening, everything changed. I came home from work and immediately knew something was wrong. My bedroom door was open. Every drawer had been pulled out. My backpack was lying on the floor. The envelope where I kept my savings was sitting on the kitchen table. Empty. I looked at my father. "Where's my money?" He didn't even look embarrassed. He calmly replied, "We used it." I stared at him. "What do you mean? You used it?" "We had bills." My mother didn't defend me. Instead, she said, "You live under this roof. Your money belongs to this family, too." I felt my chest tighten. 4 years. 4 years of working weekends, skipping lunches, walking to work because I couldn't afford gas. Gone in one afternoon. I cried harder than I ever had before. Not because of the money, because I finally understood the truth. I wasn't their daughter. I was their emergency bank account. For the next few days, I barely spoke. I worked longer hours. I avoided going home. Something inside me had changed. I stopped believing things would ever get better. Then, exactly 1 week later, my brother crashed my father's pickup truck. He had been speeding with his friends. Instead of blaming him, my parents blamed me. "If you had driven him to work, this never would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For the first time in my life, I answered back, "This isn't my fault." The room went silent. My father's face turned bright red. He pointed toward the front door. "If you don't like the way this family works, you can leave." I waited. Surely my mother would stop him. She didn't. She walked to the hallway, grabbed a black trash bag, stuffed a few of my clothes inside, and handed it to me. "Good luck." That was it. No hug, no tears, no apology. Just, good luck. I walked out of the only home I'd ever known carrying everything I owned in a black garbage bag. It was freezing outside. I had less than $30 in my wallet. No apartment. No relatives willing to help. No idea where I would sleep that night. I sat alone at a bus stop for nearly 2 hours. People walked past me without even looking. Cars rushed by. The wind cut through my jacket. For the first time, I was completely alone. I remember staring at the traffic and asking myself one question. What happens to people who have nowhere left to go? That night, I made a promise. I would never beg my family to love me. I would never ask them for another dollar. And one day, I would build a life so successful that no one would ever have the power to make me feel worthless again. At that moment, I had no idea how difficult that journey would become, because the next morning, I would wake up homeless, and the first person I trusted would betray me in a way I never saw coming. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I spent most of it sitting on a cold wooden bench at a bus stop, hugging a black trash bag that held everything I owned. Every passing car made me look up. Every set of headlights gave me hope. Maybe my mom had changed her mind. Maybe my dad regretted what he'd done. Maybe someone was coming to take me home. No one came. Around 5 in the morning, the temperature dropped even lower. My fingers were numb. I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. I stood up, stretched my aching legs, and realized something terrifying. I was officially homeless. I walked to the nearest 24-hour diner just to get warm. I ordered the cheapest cup of coffee on the menu and made it last for almost 3 hours. The waitress noticed I wasn't eating. She smiled kindly and asked, "Long night?" I forced a smile. "You could say that." She quietly placed a plate of toast in front of me. "I made too much," she said. I knew she was lying, but I also knew she was trying to protect my dignity. That simple act of kindness almost made me cry. It was the first time a stranger had treated me better than my own family. When I finally checked my wallet, I had just $28 left. That money had to last until I found another paycheck. I couldn't afford a motel. I couldn't afford an apartment. I couldn't even afford to fail. My old sedan became my home. The back seat was too short to sleep comfortably. Every morning, I woke up with a stiff neck and sore back. I parked in different places each night because I was afraid someone would notice. During the day, I worked my grocery store shift with a smile on my face. No one knew I was living in my car. I showered at a low-cost gym using a 1-month trial membership. I washed my clothes in a laundromat every Sunday. I learned how to hide my situation. Because people judge you the moment they hear the word homeless. One afternoon, I called my aunt. She had always been nice to me when I was little. I thought maybe, just maybe, she would let me stay for a few weeks. She answered the phone. I explained everything. There was silence. Then she sighed. "I'm sorry, Emma. Your father told the whole family not to get involved. I can't go against him." The call ended. I stared at my phone for a long time. That was the moment I realized I had truly lost my family. A few days later, something unexpected happened. My store manager asked me to stay after my shift. My heart sank. I thought I was being fired. Instead, he looked at me and said, "Emma, are you okay?" I smiled. "I'm fine." He didn't believe me. "You've been working every extra shift. You look exhausted." For a second, I almost told him everything, but fear stopped me. If he knew I was homeless, would he still trust me? Would he think I was unreliable? So I lied. "I've just been tired." He nodded slowly. Before I left, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a small employee bonus, $100. To anyone else, it wasn't much. To me, it meant another week without starving. That night, sitting alone in my car, I promised myself something. One day, I would never have to worry about money again. Not because I wanted luxury, because I never wanted to feel powerless again. I didn't know it yet. But only a few days later, a chance encounter with a complete stranger was about to change the direction of my entire life. And it all started with a forgotten wallet. The next morning started like every other. I woke up in my car before sunrise because the cold had become too uncomfortable to ignore. I folded the small blanket I kept in the back seat, changed into my work clothes in a gas station restroom, and drove to the grocery store. My entire life had become a routine of survival. Wake up, work, save every dollar, pretend everything was fine, repeat. No one noticed how exhausted I was. Or maybe they did. They just didn't ask. It was a busy Saturday afternoon when everything changed. Customers rushed through the checkout lines. Shopping carts filled every aisle. I had barely stopped moving for hours. Then I noticed a black leather wallet lying on the floor near register 4. I picked it up and looked around. No one seemed to be looking for it. When I opened it to find an ID, my heart nearly stopped. There was over $3,000 in cash inside. $3,000. It was more money than I had ever held in my hands. For a brief second, a dangerous thought crossed my mind. No one saw me pick it up. No one knew it was here. That money could change my life. I could finally rent a room, buy real food, replace the worn-out tires on my car, maybe even start over. Then another voice inside my head whispered, "If you become the kind of person who steals because life is hard, you'll never become the person you're trying to be." I closed the wallet immediately and carried it to the customer service desk. About 20 minutes later, an older man rushed into the store. He looked panicked. He spoke to the manager for a moment before they pointed toward me. He walked over quickly. "Did you find my wallet?" I handed it to him. He opened it, counted the cash, and looked at me with complete disbelief. "Everything's here." He smiled. "You have no idea how rare that is." I shrugged. It wasn't mine. He laughed softly. "Most people would have taken at least something." I smiled politely. "I know what it's like to lose everything." For a moment, he just looked at me, like he knew there was more to my story than I was saying. Before leaving, he handed me his business card. "My name is Richard Collins. If you ever need help finding work, give me a call." I thanked him, slipped the card into my pocket, and went back to work. Honestly, I didn't think much about it. People say things like that all the time. Most never mean it. 3 days later, life hit me again. When I walked out to the parking lot after my shift, my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. I sat behind the steering wheel and cried. Not because of the car. Because that car wasn't just transportation anymore. It was my home. Without it, I had nowhere to sleep. I searched my wallet. $42. A mechanic told me replacing the battery would cost nearly $200. Money I didn't have. I sat there for almost an hour, wondering what to do. Then I remembered the business card. Richard Collins. I stared at it for several minutes. Should I call? Would he even remember me? Would I sound desperate? Finally, I took a deep breath and dialed the number. The phone rang twice. Richard Collins speaking. "Hi. You probably don't remember me. I'm Emma. I found your wallet a few days ago." There was a short pause. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Of course I remember you. Honest people are hard to forget." I explained what had happened. I wasn't asking for money. I simply asked if he knew anyone hiring for evening work. He listened quietly. Then he said, "Emma, I think we should meet. I may have something better than another part-time job." At that moment, I had no idea that one phone call was about to open a door that would completely change my future. The next morning, I drove my barely running car to the address Richard had given me. It wasn't a fancy skyscraper. It was a simple 3-story office building on the edge of downtown Chicago. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My blazer came from a thrift store. My shoes were worn out. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. I kept thinking, I don't belong here. Finally, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The receptionist smiled. Good morning. You must be Emma. That surprised me. She already knew my name. A few minutes later, Richard walked out of his office with a warm smile. I'm glad you came. His office wasn't filled with expensive decorations. Instead, every wall was covered with books about leadership, finance, and entrepreneurship. He offered me coffee. Then he asked a question no one had ever asked me before. So, tell me your story. For the next 30 minutes, I told him everything about my family, about sleeping in my car, about losing my savings, about pretending everything was fine. When I finished, the room was silent. Richard leaned back in his chair. You know what impressed me the most? I shook my head. It wasn't that you returned my wallet. It was that you did it even when you desperately needed the money. He smiled. You can teach skills. You can't teach character. Then he surprised me. I own a small business consulting firm. We're looking for an administrative assistant. It doesn't pay much. But if you're willing to learn, I'll teach you everything I know. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No college degree, no experience. Just one chance. I accepted immediately. The pay was only $18 an hour. It wasn't enough to change my life overnight, but it was enough to keep moving forward. I worked mornings at the consulting office and evenings at the grocery store. Sometimes I worked 16 hours a day. There were nights when I fell asleep sitting in my car before I even started driving. But for the first time, I felt like my life was moving in the right direction. Richard noticed something about me. Every lunch break, instead of scrolling through my phone, I read books, marketing, sales, accounting, negotiation, anything I could get my hands on. One afternoon, he walked into the break room and laughed. Most people spend lunch complaining. You spend lunch learning. I smiled. I can't afford to stay the same. From that day on, he began giving me extra responsibilities. First, organizing client files, then answering business emails. Soon, I was sitting in meetings, quietly taking notes. I listened carefully. Every client had a problem. Every successful business solved one. That lesson stayed with me. Months passed. I finally saved enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't glamorous. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person. The furniture came from thrift stores. The mattress was on the floor. But the first night I slept there, I cried. Not because it was beautiful, because it was mine. No one could throw me out. No one could take it away. One evening, Richard handed me a stack of old client reports. Read these. I looked confused. What am I looking for? He smiled. Find a problem nobody else noticed. I spent the entire weekend reading. By Sunday night, I noticed something strange. Small businesses weren't failing because they had bad products. Most were failing because they didn't know how to market themselves online. Almost no one was talking about digital marketing for local businesses. I wrote down every idea I had, more than 30 pages of notes. On Monday morning, I placed them on Richard's desk. He spent nearly an hour reading them. Then he looked up at me with a smile I'd never seen before. Emma, I think you just found $1 million opportunity. At that moment, I had no idea that the notebook sitting on his desk would become the first step toward building a company worth billions. When Richard told me I had found $1 million opportunity, I laughed. Not because I thought he was joking, because I couldn't imagine someone like me building a business. I was the girl who had slept in her car, the girl whose own parents said she would never amount to anything. A business? That sounded like a dream meant for someone else. Richard slid my notebook back across the desk. Emma, every successful company starts with someone solving a real problem. You've already found the problem. Now you have to build the solution. For weeks, I spent every free minute researching. I watched free online business classes. I borrowed books from the public library. I interviewed small business owners during my lunch breaks. Again and again, I heard the same thing. We're good at what we do, but we don't know how to get customers online. That's when I realized Richard was right. Thousands of small businesses needed help. I just had to figure out how to help them. There was only one problem. I had almost no money. After paying rent, buying groceries, and putting gas in my old car, I had barely $300 left. So instead of renting an office, I turned my tiny apartment into one. The kitchen table became my desk. Cardboard boxes became bookshelves. My old laptop sounded like it might explode every time I opened too many tabs. But I didn't care. I wasn't trying to look successful. I was trying to become successful. One Saturday morning, I printed 50 simple flyers. They read, "Need more customers? I help local businesses grow online. No fancy logo, no expensive design. Just my name, my phone number, and a promise to work harder than anyone else." For 2 straight days, I walked through neighborhoods, introducing myself to local business owners. Most didn't even let me finish my sentence. Some smiled politely and said, "We already have someone." Others weren't so polite. One man looked me up and down and laughed. "You? You look like you're 20. What could you possibly know about growing a business?" The people standing nearby laughed too. I smiled, thanked him for his time, and walked away. The truth? His words hurt. A lot. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at my notebook. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe my parents had been telling the truth all along. I was seconds away from throwing the notebook into the trash. Then my phone rang. It was Richard. "How's the business going?" I hesitated. "I don't think I can do this." He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed my mindset forever. "Emma, if people laugh at your dream before you've even started, you're probably doing something worth chasing." I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I rewrote my entire business plan. The next morning, I started again. This time, I visited businesses before they opened. I offered to create a free online marketing plan. No contracts, no pressure, just results. For nearly 3 weeks, everyone said no. 32 businesses, 32 rejections. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, a small family-owned bakery invited me inside. The owner, Mrs. Carter, folded her arms and smiled. "I can't pay much, but if you really believe you can help, you have 1 month." I almost cried. It wasn't a big contract. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was my first chance. I worked harder than I ever had before. I redesigned their website, posted daily on social media, ran inexpensive local ads, photographed every product myself using my phone. Some nights I worked until 3 in the morning. 4 weeks later, Mrs. Carter called me into her office. She placed a folder on the table. Inside were her sales reports. Revenue had increased by 47%. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Emma, this is the best month we've had in 6 years." For the first time, someone wasn't thanking me for surviving. They were thanking me for making a difference. I walked out of that bakery holding my very first business check. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof. Proof that I could build something with my own hands. What I didn't know was that someone had been watching my work from the very beginning. And within days, an unexpected phone call would bring me the biggest opportunity of my life. The check from Mrs. Carter's bakery wasn't life-changing. After taxes and expenses, I made less than most people earned in a week. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had earned money using my mind instead of just my hands. I framed a copy of that very first invoice and hung it above my desk. Not because it was valuable, but because it reminded me where I started. Within a few weeks, something interesting happened. Mrs. Carter began telling other business owners about me. "I don't know what this young woman is doing," she would say, "but whatever she's doing, it's working." Word of mouth became my greatest advertisement. Soon I had 3 clients, then 5, then 8. Every new client brought a new challenge: a family-owned hardware store, a local coffee shop, a dental clinic, a small furniture company. Every business was different. Every owner had a different dream. And every success made me believe in myself a little more. I was still working full-time for Richard during the day. At night, I worked on my own business until 2 or 3 in the morning. There were weeks when I slept less than 4 hours a night. Coffee became my best friend. One Friday afternoon, Richard called me into his office. He smiled as soon as I walked in. "So, how many clients now?" "8." He nodded proudly. "I remember when you were afraid to knock on your first door." I laughed. "So do I." Then his expression became serious. "Emma, you have a decision to make." I looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You can't build $1 million company as a part-time hobby." The room went silent. He was right. If I wanted my business to grow, I'd eventually have to leave the safest job I'd ever had. That terrified me. For 3 nights I couldn't sleep. I made lists, calculated expenses, counted every dollar in my savings account. If my business failed, I'd lose everything. Again. Finally, on Monday morning, I walked into Richard's office carrying a resignation letter. Before I could speak, he smiled. "I was wondering when you'd come." I handed him the letter. My hands were shaking. He read it slowly. Then he stood up and hugged me. "I'm proud of you. You've outgrown this place." I felt tears filling my eyes. "You gave me my first real chance." He smiled. "No, Emma. You earned it." Before I left, he handed me a small wrapped box. "Open it later." That evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened the package. Inside was a beautiful leather notebook. On the first page, Richard had written, "Success isn't built by never falling. It's built by getting up one more time than everyone else." I kept that notebook on my desk every single day after that. Now my business had my full attention. I rented a tiny office. It wasn't much. 1 room, 2 secondhand desks, 3 folding chairs, an old coffee machine that barely worked. But to me, it looked like the headquarters of a future empire. I hired my first employee. Her name was Sarah. She had recently lost her job and needed someone to believe in her, just like Richard had believed in me. On her first day, she looked around our tiny office and laughed. "So, are we really starting a company here?" I smiled. "One day we'll laugh about this office. We just don't know it yet." Business kept growing. 10 clients, 15, 22. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. Then one Tuesday morning, everything almost came crashing down. I opened my business email and froze. One of our largest clients had canceled their contract overnight. That single email erased nearly 40% of our monthly revenue. I stared at the screen. Payroll was due in 9 days. Rent was due next week. If I couldn't replace that client, the company I had sacrificed everything to build might disappear before its first anniversary. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and realized this was the biggest test of my life so far. I stared at the email for what felt like forever. One click, one message, and nearly 40% of my company's monthly income was gone. Sarah walked into my office carrying 2 coffees. She looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" I turned my laptop toward her. She read the email. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. Finally, she looked at me and asked the question I had been avoiding. "Are we going to make payroll?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to sound confident. Instead, I told her the truth. I don't know. That was the hardest sentence I had ever spoken as a business owner. For the first time since starting my company, I realized other people were depending on me. This wasn't just my dream anymore. Sarah had rent to pay. Our freelance designer had 2 young children. The businesses that trusted us were counting on us. If I failed, they would all pay the price. That night, I stayed in the office until almost 3 in the morning. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I started making a plan. I wrote one sentence across the top of a whiteboard. Find the next customer. The next morning, I called every local business I could find. Some ignored me. Some hung up before I finished introducing myself. A few listened politely but said they weren't interested. By lunchtime, I had been rejected 23 times. Old memories came rushing back. The grocery store, sleeping in my car, my parents telling me I would never succeed. For a moment, I wondered if they had been right. Then I looked at the leather notebook Richard had given me. I opened to the first page. Success isn't built by never falling. It's built by getting up one more time than everyone else. I smiled. Not today, I whispered. I'm not giving up today. That afternoon, I changed my strategy. Instead of trying to sell my services over the phone, I started visiting businesses in person again, just like I had on the first day. By the end of the week, my feet were covered in blisters. My voice was almost gone. But something unexpected happened. A manager at a regional restaurant chain asked me to sit down. "I've heard your name before," he said. "Mrs. Carter speaks very highly of you." He asked dozens of questions. How would I increase customer traffic? How would I measure results? How much would it cost? I answered every question honestly. I didn't promise miracles. I promised hard work. 3 days later, he called. "We'd like to give you a chance." It wasn't just one restaurant. It was 12 locations. It was the biggest contract my company had ever received. I ran into the main office holding the signed agreement. Sarah looked at my face and started laughing. "We got it, didn't we?" I couldn't even speak. I just nodded. She threw her arms around me. For the first time in months, we could breathe again. Over the next year, everything changed. The restaurant campaign was a success. Sales increased across multiple locations. Other companies noticed. New clients kept coming. We hired more employees, moved into a larger office. Then an even bigger opportunity arrived. A national retail company invited us to compete for a multi-million-dollar marketing contract. There was just one problem. We were competing against some of the biggest agencies in America. Companies with hundreds of employees, million-dollar budgets, and decades of experience. Sarah looked at me and smiled. "Do you really think we can beat them?" I looked out the office window for a long moment. Then I remembered the girl who had once slept in her car. The girl who had been told she would never become anything. I smiled back. "We're not here because we're the biggest. We're here because we refuse to quit." A week later, I walked into the most important business presentation of my life, and sitting on the judging panel was someone I never expected to see again, someone from my past, someone who knew exactly where I came from, and the expression on their face told me they never imagined seeing me there. The conference room was unlike anything I had ever seen. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago. A polished oak table stretched across the room. Around it sat 8 executives, each with years of experience and million-dollar decisions behind them. As Sarah and I walked in, I reminded myself to breathe. We weren't here by accident. We had earned this. The company was looking for one marketing agency to handle the launch of more than 200 retail stores across the country. Winning this contract could change everything. Losing it would simply mean we had to keep fighting. As I placed my laptop on the table, my eyes moved across the panel. Then, My heart stopped. Sitting at the far end of the table was a face I hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. David Turner, my high school guidance counselor. The man who had once looked me in the eye and said, "Emma, maybe college just isn't realistic for someone in your situation." Back then, I had believed him. Now, he was staring at my name on the presentation screen. His eyes widened slightly. He recognized me, but he didn't say a word. The presentation began. For 45 minutes, I explained our strategy. No flashy promises, no exaggerated numbers, just real data, real solutions, and a clear plan to help their business grow. When I finished, the room fell silent. One executive asked, "Your company is much smaller than the others we're considering. Why should we trust you with a national campaign?" I smiled. Because when you're small, you can't afford to care less than your competitors. We don't treat clients like account numbers. We treat them like partners. Another executive leaned forward. "What happens if something goes wrong?" I answered without hesitation. "Then we'll be the first people to admit it, and the first people working to fix it." The meeting ended. No one gave away any clues. They thanked us for coming. Sarah and I walked to the elevator in complete silence. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think we have a chance?" I smiled nervously. "I honestly don't know." For the next 2 weeks, every time my phone rang, my heart raced. Nothing. No emails, no calls, just waiting. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone lit up. Unknown number. I answered. "Hello? Emma Hayes? This is Michael Reynolds from Horizon Retail. I have good news. We'd like your company to lead our national marketing campaign." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked at Sarah. She could tell from my face. Before I said a single word, she started crying. We had done it. We had beaten companies 10 times our size. That contract changed everything. Within 18 months, our revenue tripled, then doubled again. We hired dozens of talented people, opened offices in 3 cities, built a culture where everyone was treated with respect, something I had never experienced growing up. I made one promise to every new employee. No one here will ever feel invisible, because I knew exactly what that felt like. 5 years passed faster than I ever imagined. Our company had grown from a tiny apartment with 1 employee into one of the fastest growing marketing firms in the country. Business magazines started calling. Podcast invitations filled my inbox. People began referring to me as a successful entrepreneur. It still felt strange. I never forgot the girl who slept in her car. One afternoon, my assistant walked into my office holding an envelope. There wasn't a return address. I opened it. Inside was a simple handwritten note. It read, "Emma, we need to talk. It's important. Please call us." No signature, no explanation, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to my mother. After 10 years of complete silence, my family had finally remembered I existed. I stared at the note for a long time. The same people who had handed me a black trash bag were suddenly asking for my attention. I had spent years imagining this moment, but now that it had arrived, I had no idea what I was going to do. I stared at my mother's note for almost an hour. 10 years, 10 birthdays, 10 Christmases, 10 years without a single phone call, message, or apology. And now, "We need to talk. It's important." That was all she wrote. No, "How are you?" No, "We miss you." No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just, "We need to talk." I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer. I told myself I wouldn't respond. I had spent years building a life that no longer depended on their approval. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What could they possibly want? Had something happened? Were they sick? Or was this simply guilt arriving 10 years late? The next morning, I was in the middle of a board meeting when my assistant quietly stepped inside. "Emma, there's someone here asking for you." I looked up. "Who?" She hesitated. "Your brother." The room suddenly felt smaller. Tyler. I hadn't seen him since the night I was thrown out. I excused myself and walked to the reception area. At first, I barely recognized him. The confident athlete from high school was gone. His shoulders were slumped. His clothes were wrinkled. He looked older than his age. When he saw me, he stood up quickly. "Emma." I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" He looked down at the floor. "Mom asked me to come." I waited. "Dad lost the house." The words hit me harder than I expected. He continued quietly. "After the factory closed, things got bad. They borrowed money, then borrowed more. Dad thought he could fix it, but he couldn't." I didn't say anything. Tyler swallowed hard. "They're staying with a friend right now." "And?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "They need help." There it was. Not an apology, not accountability. Help. I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. I remembered sleeping in my car while they stayed warm inside the house. I remembered begging for my savings back. I remembered my mother handing me a trash bag and saying, "Good luck." And now they were standing in my office asking for help. Tyler spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. "I know we don't deserve anything from you." That surprised me. For the first time in his life, my brother sounded ashamed. He reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a list of debts: mortgage, credit cards, medical bills. The total was more money than my parents had probably earned in several years. "Mom thinks you can make it all disappear," he said bitterly. "Can you?" I looked at the paper. Technically, yes. I could write a check that afternoon and solve every financial problem they had. But another question was echoing in my mind. If I did, would it heal anything? Tyler stood there waiting for my answer. I took a slow breath. "Tell them I'll meet them tomorrow." His eyes widened. "You will?" I nodded. "But this isn't about money." He looked relieved, but I wasn't sure he understood what I meant. After he left, I walked back to my office and sat alone for a long time. On the wall above my desk was the framed copy of my very first invoice, the bakery, the beginning of everything. I thought about the promise I made at that bus stop 10 years earlier. I would never beg them to love me again. I had kept that promise, but tomorrow, I was about to face the people who had broken me, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted closure, revenge, or simply the truth. What I didn't know was that my father had one more secret. A secret that would change the way I remembered my entire childhood. And when he finally confessed it, I would have to make the hardest decision of my life. The next afternoon, I drove to the address Tyler had given me. It wasn't my parents' old house. That had been sold months earlier. Instead, it was a small apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place my parents used to look down on. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at the building. 10 years ago, I had left home with a black trash bag full of clothes. Now I was arriving in a car I had paid for myself. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. I walked upstairs and knocked. The door opened slowly. My mother stood there. For a second, neither of us spoke. She looked older. Her hair had turned almost completely gray. The confidence she once carried was gone. "Emma." Her voice cracked. I simply nodded. "Hello, Mom." She stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was small. The furniture didn't match. Several moving boxes were still stacked against the wall. My father sat quietly at the kitchen table. For the first time in my life, he looked defeated. No one knew how to begin. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "We're glad you came." I looked at both of them. "You asked to see me. So tell me why." My father took a deep breath. We made mistakes. I waited. That wasn't enough. He looked down at his hands. When you were young, I believed Tyler would take care of us someday. He was good at sports. Everyone told me he'd make it. So I invested everything in him. He paused. And I treated you like an extra expense. Hearing him admit it out loud hurt more than I expected. My mother started crying. We kept telling ourselves we'd make it up to you later. But later never came. I looked at them quietly. For 10 years? Neither of them answered. Then my father said something I never imagined hearing. I was wrong. I failed you as a father. I've regretted that night every single day. The room became silent. Part of me had dreamed about hearing those words. Another part wondered why they had come only after they had lost everything. I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my heart for years. If your business hadn't failed, if you still had your house, would you have come looking for me? Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. After a long pause, my mother quietly admitted, probably not. It hurt. But strangely, it also set me free. Because for the first time, I knew the truth. This meeting wasn't about love, it was about necessity. My father slid a folder across the table. Inside were unpaid bills, loan documents, medical expenses, and foreclosure papers. We're asking for your help. I know we don't deserve it, but we're out of options. I closed the folder without looking at the numbers again. Money wasn't the real issue. Trust was. I stood up. My parents looked terrified. My father whispered, "So, that's it?" I looked him in the eyes. "I didn't come here to punish you. I came here to understand." He lowered his head. "I understand now." I walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. "I'll help you." Both of them looked up in disbelief. "But not the way you think. I'm not writing a blank check. I'm not buying another relationship. If I help, it will come with boundaries. You'll have to rebuild your lives the same way I rebuilt mine. No lies. No manipulation. No expecting me to forget the past." Tears rolled down my mother's face. She nodded slowly. "I understand." As I walked out of the apartment, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because I had forgiven them completely, but because I had finally stopped carrying the weight of their choices. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The very next morning, a reporter called my office. Someone had leaked my family story to the media, and within hours, millions of people were talking about my life. By the next morning, my life had become national news. Someone had leaked the story. Self-made CEO reunites with the family who kicked her out at 18. Every major business blog seemed to have an opinion. Some people called me an inspiration. Others said I should forgive my parents immediately. A few insisted I didn't owe them anything. Millions of strangers were debating a life they had never lived. I ignored the headlines, because none of them knew the whole story. When I arrived at the office, reporters were waiting outside. Microphones, cameras, questions shouted from every direction. "Emma, are you giving your parents money? Have you forgiven them? Is it true they made you homeless?" I kept walking. I had spent 10 years protecting my peace. I wasn't going to lose it in 5 minutes. Inside the office, Sarah handed me a folder. "You should probably see this." It was a proposal from a television network. They wanted an exclusive interview. The amount they were offering was more money than I had earned in my first year of business. I closed the folder. "No." Sarah looked surprised. "You don't even want to hear their offer?" I smiled. I didn't build this company by selling my pain. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Tyler. "Can we meet?" An hour later, he walked into my office. He looked nervous. "I need to tell you something." I stayed quiet. When Dad lost the house, he finally admitted something to me. I listened carefully. Tyler took a deep breath. The night they threw you out. Mom cried after you left. I didn't react. He continued. She wanted to call you back. But Dad stopped her. He said if you came back, you'd never learn to survive on your own. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? Disappointment? Tyler shook his head. I told him he was wrong. I should have defended you back then. I'm sorry, Emma. That was the first genuine apology anyone in my family had ever given me. I looked at my brother for a long moment. I appreciate you saying that. He nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth. After he left, I stood by my office window overlooking the city. I realized something. For years, I thought success would erase the pain. It didn't. It simply gave me the freedom to choose how I responded to it. Late that evening, I drove to the small apartment where my parents were staying. Not to bring money, not to argue, just to say one final thing. My parents opened the door together. Before either of them could speak, I said quietly, I forgive you. Tears filled my mother's eyes. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. We can't go back and change what happened. We can only choose what happens next. My father nodded silently. For the first time in my life, he wasn't trying to defend himself. He was simply listening. Then I handed him a business card. It wasn't a check. It was the contact information for a career counselor and a financial advisor my company worked with. If you're serious about rebuilding your life, start here. I'll pay for the guidance. But the work has to be yours. My father looked at the card with trembling hands. Then he whispered, I understand. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had finally stopped letting my past control my future. Little did I know. 1 year later, my parents would make a decision that no one, including me, ever expected. 1 year later, my life looked very different. Our company had expanded into 7 states. We had more than 300 employees. For the first time in my life, people introduced me as a billionaire entrepreneur. But something had changed inside me. I no longer measured success by the number in my bank account. I measured it by the number of lives we were able to change. Every year, my company funded scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. We created internship programs for young people who had grown up in difficult homes, and we launched an emergency assistance fund for employees facing unexpected hardships. I built the kind of workplace I had once wished existed for me. One afternoon, Sarah walked into my office with a smile. You have visitors. I looked toward the reception area. It was my parents. But this time, they weren't asking for help. My father stood a little straighter than the last time I had seen him. He looked healthier, more confident. My mother smiled nervously. My father held out a small envelope. What's this? I asked. He smiled. It's something I should have given you years ago. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount wasn't large. It was exactly $900, the same amount they had taken from me when I was 18. Attached to it was a handwritten note. You earned this long before we deserved to return it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father quietly said, I know $900 can't undo 10 years of pain. But I wanted to return the first thing we ever stole from your future. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money, because for the first time, I believed he truly understood what he had taken from me. I folded the check and handed it back. I don't want the money. My parents looked confused. I smiled. Donate it. Find an 18-year-old who's trying to build a better life. Give them the chance I never had. My mother started crying. So, You really forgive us? I took a deep breath. I forgave you a long time ago. But forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply allows us to stop living in it. My father nodded slowly. I understand. Before leaving, he hugged me. It was the first real hug my father had ever given me. It lasted only a few seconds, but somehow, it healed years of silence. After they left, I walked into my office. On the wall still hung the framed copy of my first bakery invoice. Next to it was Richard's old leather notebook. I opened to the first page. The words were exactly as I remembered them. Success isn't built by never falling, it's built by getting up one more time than everyone else. I smiled. He had been right. People often ask me how I became a billionaire. They expect me to talk about investments, business strategies, or lucky opportunities, but the truth is much simpler. I became successful the day I stopped letting other people's opinion define my future. Money came later. The real victory was believing in myself when no one else did. If my story teaches anything, I hope it's this. Your past may shape you, but it never has to decide where your future ends. Sometimes the people who refuse to believe in you become the reason you learn to believe in yourself. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't proving someone wrong, it's building a life so full of purpose that you no longer need revenge at all.